He was a millionaire used to controlling everything, people, secrets, even fate itself. She was a maid, invisible to the eyes of power yet carrying something he could never possess. The truth. And when the sharp sound of a hand striking the table echoed through the room that night, their worlds shattered in silence. What seemed like a simple accusation would unravel into a labyrinth of guilt, redemption, and secrets buried within the walls of a mansion where nothing was as it seemed. Get ready to dive into a story where power collides with conscience, and even love must fight against the darkness. If you love intense plots, shocking twists, and stories that make your heart race, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. There's much more to come. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We want to know how far this sound of a hand striking the table will echo. The Hall mansion rose imposingly among the suburbs of New York, surrounded by tall walls and perfectly symmetrical gardens. Its mirrored windows reflected the gray sky and concealed what happened inside. The iron gate opened slowly, revealing Martha Collins, a maid newly hired for the job. The cold wind drifted through the trees, carrying a silence that seemed to observe every step. The house wasn't just clean, it seemed to breathe order. Inside, the environment was vast and meticulously organized. Marble floors, long hallways, white walls, and lights that turned on automatically with each movement. The sound of Martha's footsteps echoed through the rooms as if the mansion were an enormous hollow hall. In every corner, discreet cameras rotated slowly. The millionaire Richard Hall oversaw everything, even when he wasn't physically present. The routine began early. Martha cleaned the hallways, the office, and the main living room, always under the watchful gaze of the lenses. The staff avoided long conversations, and the clocks seemed to mark time differently inside those walls. The air was heavy and still, as though no window had been opened for weeks. The mansion was silent, and that silence seemed to be part of the house rules. Richard Hall rarely appeared. When he did, he moved calmly, dressed impeccably, his expression unreadable. The millionaire spoke little and observed much. His gaze was firm, calculated, like someone who left nothing to chance. His orders were direct, and the staff responded with immediate obedience. In that place, every word carried weight and every gesture seemed measured. Martha stayed focused on her work. She cleaned, organized, and kept everything in perfect order. Even so, she could feel the cameras following her every move. The mansion contained dozens of them, placed at strategic angles, recording every detail. It was impossible to be there without sensing the constant feeling of being watched. Everything suggested that the millionaire controlled the environment with absolute precision. During one of her tasks, Martha noticed something peculiar. One of the doors in the main hallway was always locked. No employee went near it, and when she asked about the room, she was met only with silence. The keys were kept under Richard's direct control. It was the only space left untouched, as if it hid something that was never meant to be seen. Each day, the maid noticed more details that kept her alert. Objects changed places, lights flickered on by themselves, and doors slowly closed with no wind at all. Nothing was explained, and no one spoke about it. The routine continued with mechanical precision, and time seemed to repeat itself. There was an invisible pattern imposed by the presence of the millionaire, even when he was not around. In the late afternoon, the reflection of the setting sun crossed the stained glass windows and flooded the corridors with shades of red. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the mansion took on an almost unreal aspect. Martha continued her work in silence, collecting dust and avoiding distractions. Even so, the air carried a tension that was hard to ignore. Every sound, every movement seemed larger than it should be. When night fell, the mansion became even colder. The automatic lights dimmed, and the security system emitted soft, constant hums. Martha gathered her supplies, ended her shift, and walked toward the small room reserved for the staff. As the digital clock struck midnight, a distant sound echoed, a dry, firm knock reverberating through the main corridor. Dinner was underway when the silence became heavier than the sound of silverware. The lights reflected off the crystal glasses, and the guests maintained polite, tense conversations. Richard Hall, the millionaire, sat at the head of the table, motionless, observing every gesture as if calculating an invisible equation. Evelyn, his wife, smiled faintly, though her eyes revealed unease. Martha, the maid, served quietly, moving like a shadow between luxury and discomfort. The sharp crack of the millionaire's hand striking the table silenced every voice. The glasses trembled, and the sound echoed like a muted thunderclap. Richard stood, his face tense, and pointed toward Martha. His words came out cold, direct, and cutting. He accused her of stealing Evelyn's diamond necklace. For a moment, no one breathed. The air in the room seemed to split in two. The maid froze. Her hands trembled, and the plate she held almost slipped. She denied it in a soft voice, then more firmly. But the millionaire's gaze didn't move. He seemed to have already decided her guilt before hearing a single word. Evelyn tried to speak, but Richard raised his hand, silencing her before she could continue. The atmosphere in the room was one of judgment, not discussion. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to leave or stay and watch. The sound of a single drop falling from the wine decanter was too loud, as if time itself had stopped. Martha, holding back tears, tried to explain, but her words disappeared into the silence. The millionaire, with a steady, cold voice, repeated, "It was her." Each syllable landed like a verdict. Soon, the wail of sirens cut through the night air outside. The police had been called. Red lights reflected off the mansion's windows, casting dancing shadows on the white walls. The maid stood motionless as the officers entered, confused by the tense atmosphere. Evelyn stepped back, her eyes distant, while Richard remained standing, unmoved, as if watching a play he had written himself. Detective John Dawson was the first to approach. His analytical gaze swept the room, measuring the silence and the faces. The questions were brief, formal, and the millionaire answered with precision. Martha, crying, denied everything but seemed invisible among the suspicious stares. Evelyn avoided eye contact as if she carried a secret she could not reveal. The dinner had turned into a courtroom. According to Richard, the necklace had disappeared hours earlier. The safe was intact and no one but the maid had access to the room. The evidence seemed to align, yet something didn't add up. Dawson noticed the details: the lack of footprints, the untouched locks, the calm precision with which the millionaire handled it all. There was too much order in something that should have been chaos. Suddenly, a scream came from upstairs. Everyone turned. One of the servants ran down, breathless, stammering. The necklace had been found in the millionaire's office. The shock was immediate. The piece sat on the desk, gleaming under artificial light, in a place where no one should have been able to enter. No explanation seemed possible. Richard stayed silent for several seconds. His face showed no surprise, only a faint movement at the corner of his lips. The detective stepped closer, trying to make sense of the scene. Martha wept quietly, unable to understand what was happening. Evelyn stared at her husband with an empty expression, and amid the restrained chaos, it felt as if the real mystery had only just begun. The mansion's atmosphere was filled with echoes of footsteps and muffled voices. The police had surrounded the property, and the millionaire remained in his office under observation. The glass walls reflected the flashing lights outside, mixing the red of the sirens with the cold white of the lamps. Detective John Dawson examined the space carefully, moving slowly among the furniture. Everything seemed meticulously arranged, nothing out of place, and yet everything subtly wrong. The maid, Martha Collins, waited in the hallway, accompanied by one of the officers. Her hands still trembled, her gaze fixed on the floor. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Richard Hall, the millionaire, observed every movement, maintaining his rigid, distant expression. The air in the room carried no sense of guilt or innocence, only control. It was a game in which only he knew the rules. Dawson requested access to the mansion's security footage. The head of security brought a control tablet and began playing the recordings. The cameras showed empty corridors, guests leaving, and then a hooded figure moving cautiously toward the office. The detective paused the video. On the intruder's wrist, one detail stood out: an expensive watch, an exclusive model identical to the one worn by the millionaire. Silence filled the room. Dawson turned toward Richard, who remained unmoved. No words, no reaction. The detective took a small step back, studying the man's cold, unreadable face. Martha, waiting outside, watched without understanding what was unfolding. The millionaire stood still, more focused on his own reflection in the glass than on the investigation surrounding him. There was something methodical in his calmness. The footage continued, and Dawson noticed another detail. The vault had been opened at 9:47 p.m., exactly when Richard claimed to have been at dinner. The exterior camera showed no unknown visitors, no vehicles entering the property. It was as if the intruder had materialized from within the house itself. Dawson frowned, realizing that the case defied common logic. Everything pointed to a carefully crafted performance. The maid was called back into the room. In a low voice, she described what she remembered from the previous night. Sounds, footsteps, the flickering of automatic lights in the corridor. Nothing explained how the necklace had appeared in the office. The detective noted every word while the millionaire observed in total silence. With each question, the tension grew heavier. The air thickened, and the distant wind outside seemed to whisper an omen. When Dawson finally opened the vault, he found only documents and a small flash drive. Its contents would be analyzed later, but at first glance it appeared to contain data, records, names, dates. No money, no jewelry, only information. Martha watched from a distance, unable to make sense of it. Richard folded his arms, his eyes fixed on the detective. The millionaire seemed more disturbed by the invasion of his space than by the accusation itself. The detective gestured for the search to pause. The necklace had been recovered, yet the questions kept multiplying. Why would someone place it in the owner's office? Why didn't the cameras capture the exact moment of the theft? And above all, why did the millionaire remain so calm amid the chaos? Nothing about the scene was random. The mansion concealed something deeper, something still waiting to be uncovered. Dawson left the office briefly, walking down the main hallway. The lights flickered in sequence and a faint metallic sound echoed from the ventilation system. The maid stood still as if sensing the next turn of a story only beginning to unfold. In the office, the millionaire watched the paused video feed. The image of a gloved hand wearing his own watch reflected on the screen. The day broke gray over New York. Headlines screamed across the city. Maid accused of theft in millionaire's mansion. Martha Collins's image was everywhere, distorted, cruelly captioned, followed by merciless comments. The woman who once cleaned to survive was now branded a thief. People no longer saw a weary mother. They saw a headline. The silence that once filled the mansion now spilled into the streets, where her name echoed without mercy. Meanwhile, the millionaire Richard Hall remained secluded in his glass tower. His lawyers handled every statement, and the mansion was guarded day and night. He neither denied nor regretted anything. The scandal surrounded him, yet never seemed to touch him. In front of the cameras, he maintained the calm expression of someone who believed himself untouchable. His empire stood firm, even as a simple life had been shattered. Martha gathered her few belongings into a cardboard box. Her uniform still smelled faintly of cleaning products, and her company badge hung loosely from her hand. The people in her apartment hallway avoided her gaze, recognizing her only from the news. In the small apartment, the radio repeated the same report, over and over like a sentence with no appeal. She sat on the edge of her bed, trying to grasp when everything had gone wrong. Social media became a courtroom. Comments, judgments, and cruel jokes spread without restraint. The maid's name was trending, not for years of hard work, but for the accusation made by a millionaire. The digital world, so quick to judge, seemed to thrive on other people's ruin. Every notification on her phone reminded her of the weight of public shame. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of a tired woman, but not a broken one. Amid old boxes tucked in her closet, something caught her attention, a folder stamped with the logo of the Hall Foundation. Inside were old documents, donation reports, and medical records of children involved in a research program. Among them, one name stood out, Eli Collins. Her heartbeat quickened. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, recognizing a doctor's handwriting and the date that matched her son's disappearance. That couldn't be a coincidence. Martha realized there was something far larger than the accusation itself. The millionaire, the foundation, and her son's past were intertwined in something dark. Memories struck her. The day Eli was taken for a medical trial, the promises of help, the years of silence that followed. It all clicked together painfully. The accusation hadn't been random. It had been a diversion. Someone wanted her far from the truth. While the city moved on from the scandal, Martha decided she wouldn't. She put on her worn coat, slipped the folder into her bag, and stepped out. Each gust of cold wind pushed against her, but she kept walking. She wasn't seeking to clear her name anymore. She was seeking answers. The silent maid was becoming a woman ready to face the power that had tried to destroy her. Fear was slowly giving way to resolve. Across town, Richard watched a recorded interview. The journalist praised his generosity and the Hall Foundation's breakthroughs. He smiled faintly, his face glowing under the light of the screen. But something lingered behind his eyes. The image of the maid crying in front of the press echoing in his mind like a small crack spreading through his pride. The millionaire didn't know it yet, but his fall had already begun. In her tiny apartment, Martha looked again at her son's photo. The paper was yellowed, the smile still innocent, the medical ID number stamped in the corner. A chill ran through her. She understood then that the truth she was chasing might be more painful than she imagined. Still, she closed the folder and took a deep breath. The next step would be inevitable and dangerous. Night had fallen over New York like a heavy veil. The city, glowing under artificial light, seemed to breathe with difficulty. Martha Collins walked through the narrow streets of the suburbs, coat buttoned to her neck, her face half hidden beneath the shadow of the streetlights. The maid carried the Hall Foundation folder pressed to her chest, an object that now felt more alive than any memory. Each page inside pulsed with the promise of truth and danger. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the millionaire Richard Hall remained awake. The clock neared midnight as he watched the security monitors in silence. The image of Martha still haunted him, like a wound that refused to heal. Evelyn Hall, his wife, appeared in the hallway, dressed in a pale silk robe, her bare feet gliding across the cold marble floor. Her eyes were distant, but her expression resolute. Something in her posture revealed a breaking point long postponed. Evelyn descended the staircase quietly, careful not to disturb the silence. She grabbed the car keys but paused before the living room. On the wall hung the wedding portrait, a perfect smile from a past long gone. She touched the frame softly and whispered something no one could hear. Then, without looking back, she stepped out through the side door and vanished into the night. Destiny had already begun to unfold. At that same hour, Martha sat inside a small, dimly lit cafe. Her hands trembled as she went through the papers, trying to make sense of what she saw. Graphs, medical notes, children's names, all connected to clinical experiments. None of it spoke of charity. It spoke of control. Her son's name, Eli Collins, appeared multiple times. Next to it, the Hall Biotech logo. The pieces of her pain were finally fitting together into a chilling pattern. The bell over the cafe door chimed softly. Evelyn Hall entered, soaked from the drizzle. The contrast between the two women was almost symbolic. One dressed in silk, the other in worn cotton. One shaped by luxury, the other by survival. Evelyn approached quietly, removed her hood, and met Martha's eyes. "We need to talk," she said softly, carrying the weight of a truth that could shatter everything. They sat across from each other. The silence was thick enough to feel. Even the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a warning. Evelyn spoke hesitantly, yet with sincerity. She confessed that her husband was hiding terrible secrets, that the Foundation's work was not philanthropy but manipulation, and that she herself was terrified of what she might find if she kept digging. Martha listened motionless, torn between anger and fragile hope. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. The millionaire's wife pulled a small envelope from her pocket. Inside was an old silver key. "This opens a door in the basement," she whispered. "But don't go there alone." The weight of her words lingered in the air like a curse. Martha held the key, feeling its chill against her skin. The maid and the wife of the man who had ruined her were now bound by something stronger than fear, the will to uncover the truth. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop inside the cafe. Outside, rain beat softly against the windows, while red neon lights from the street reflected across their faces. Evelyn took a deep breath and lit a small candle left on the table. The flame flickered between them, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. Neither spoke. It was the birth of a pact, and the quiet prelude to an inevitable confrontation. As Evelyn rose to leave, she looked back at Martha one last time. "He's not the man you think he is," she said, disappearing into the night. Martha remained seated, staring at the small flame still burning before her. Its reflection shimmered in her eyes, now filled with a new resolve. She knew there was no turning back. The door to her past was about to open, and what lay beyond would change everything. Night thickened like a secret on the verge of revelation. The Hall mansion stood motionless beneath the pale shimmer of the moon, its security cameras blinking like watchful eyes. Martha Collins, the maid, crossed the side garden, guided by the faint rustle of branches brushing against the windows. Each step was a challenge to fear, each breath a reminder of all she had lost. Beside her, Evelyn Hall kept her gaze steady, though her hands trembled beneath her wool coat. The two women entered through the service door, a passage known to few. Inside, the air was dense and heavy, lit only by the trembling beam of the flashlight Evelyn carried. A faint chemical smell lingered, mixing with the dampness of old stone. Every droplet that fell from the ceiling sounded like a countdown. The silence of the mansion, once familiar, now felt hostile, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. As they descended the narrow staircase, the lights began to flicker. Each step groaned beneath their weight, echoing through the darkness. Martha could feel her pulse in her temples, the same rhythm she had felt years ago when her son vanished. Evelyn led the way, her face divided between light and shadow, embodying guilt and determination in equal measure. The air between them was charged, wordless but sharp. At the bottom of the stairs stood a rusted iron door. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out the small silver key. She placed it in the maid's hand. Martha hesitated for a second, staring at the cold metal glinting under the flashlight. The click of the lock echoed through the basement like a verdict. When the door creaked open, a wave of icy air swept over them, carrying the sterile scent of disinfectant and rust. Inside was a vast space swallowed by darkness. Hospital beds lined the walls, medical files stacked high, instruments hidden beneath white sheets. The trembling light of the flashlight revealed glass tubes, syringes and bottles filled with strange colored liquids. The women moved carefully, their footsteps betraying their presence. Every sound seemed too loud, as though the room itself was listening. Martha approached a shelf and pulled down an old file. The pages were yellowed but still intact. Photographs of children, dozens of them, stared back from the paper, annotated with medical notes and the seal of the Hall Foundation. As she turned another page, her breath caught. A boy's smiling face stared up at her. The name below it froze her blood, Eli Collins. Time itself seemed to stop. The flashlight slipped slightly from her grasp. Evelyn stepped closer, peering over the maid's shoulder. The silence between them deepened, becoming almost sacred. Martha fell to her knees, clutching the photo as though she could tear it away from reality. Tears streamed down her face without a sound. "My God, what did he do to you?" she whispered, unaware that Evelyn too was crying, torn between guilt and horror. The flashlight flickered, casting moving shadows across the walls. Behind them, a bolted door drew their attention. A faint noise came from within, shallow, rhythmic, human. The two women exchanged a single look, their fear slowly transforming into instinct. Martha rose, still clutching the photo of her son. The air felt thicker, every second stretching painfully long. Evelyn took a step toward the door, her hand trembling as it touched the cold handle. The sound inside paused, then shifted again. Tension filled every inch of space, as if fate itself were holding its breath. Martha gripped the flashlight tighter, her face wet with tears but lit with determination. That door was no ordinary barrier. It was the threshold between the past and the truth, and nothing could prepare them for what waited on the other side. The sound from the other side of the door grew gradually, like a whisper trapped between fear and despair. Martha gripped the flashlight tightly while Evelyn, trembling, watched the rusted bolt. The air in the basement felt thicker now, almost unbreathable. The two women exchanged silent looks, the kind that already knows what it will find but dreads to confirm. When the key turned, the metallic click echoed like thunder. Light sliced through the darkness in uneven streaks. Inside, the room was small, the walls damp and stained. An old mattress lay on the floor, tubes connected to outdated machines, and a metal chair chained to the wall. In the center stood a motionless figure. The maid took a step forward, her heart racing, the flashlight trembling in her hand. Evelyn stayed behind, frozen, her eyes fixed. Martha crept closer. The light revealed a frail, pale boy, his thin frame bound by wires and medical tubes. The rhythmic beeping of old monitors was the only sign of life. His face was hidden in the shadows, but there was something heartbreakingly familiar in the way he breathed. Maternal instinct took over, time itself seemed to stop. Each second stretched endlessly, as if the world waited for that one inevitable truth. When the boy opened his eyes, the silence broke. His gaze was deep. Recognition came before reason. Martha felt her knees give way, the flashlight slipping from her grip. "Eli?" The word escaped her lips as a whisper between fear and hope. The boy looked up slowly. "Mom," he said, weak but real. The moment felt impossible, yet it was there. Despair and miracle meeting face to face. Evelyn took a step back, one hand covering her mouth, unable to contain the shock. The flashlight rolled on the floor, its beam spinning across the walls in restless circles. Martha fell to her knees beside her son, cupping his face in her trembling hands. The emotion transcended language. Grief, love, and fury fused into a single act. The machines beeped irregularly as if struggling to keep up with the heartbeat in the room. The basement seemed alive now. Every sound, every breath, every flicker of Eli's heartbeat filled the air. The maid whispered silent promises, clinging to the impossible sight before her. Evelyn, with tears tracing her cheeks, stood still, finally grasping the depth of what her husband had done. The image of the millionaire shifted in her mind. No longer a man of genius, but one who had played God and lost his soul. Martha noticed a small scar on the boy's neck and faint puncture marks across his arms. Her expression carried both horror and tenderness. Eli tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Martha wrapped her arms around him gently, as though her touch could undo years of absence. Evelyn knelt beside her, pulling a white sheet from a nearby cot to cover the boy. In that quiet gesture, two women from opposite worlds became the same, both victims of the same man. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the corridor above, heavy, certain, inevitable. The two women exchanged a terrified glance. The flicker of the flashlight caught the panic in their eyes. Martha turned it off, holding her son tightly against her chest. Evelyn looked up toward the staircase, her body tense, her breath quick. The basement, once a tomb for secrets, was now a trap, holding the living. The footsteps grew louder, joined by the creak of metal and the weight of what was coming. Evelyn rose, searching for something to defend herself. Martha, still kneeling, stared at the door. The boy clutched his mother's hand. And then, silence. One suspended second, as if time itself braced for impact. Behind the darkness, someone was about to enter. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The silence before the footsteps felt eternal. The basement door creaked open, revealing the figure of the millionaire, Richard Hall. His suit wrinkled, his expression hollow, a gun in his hand. The flickering light glinted off the weapon, illuminating his pale, exhausted face. He no longer looked like a man, but like a god stripped of his creation. Martha, the maid, rose slowly, shielding her son with her body. Every breath in the room became its own sound. Richard stared, unable to process what he was seeing. The boy alive, Evelyn kneeling, and the woman he had once accused of theft, now standing before the truth he had buried. "You don't understand, Martha," the millionaire said in a low, deliberate tone. "None of this is what it seems." His voice merged with the beeping of machines, creating a symphony of tension. The maid stepped forward, her fear replaced by something far sharper: fury. "You took everything from me," she said, trembling but unbroken. "My son, my name, my peace." Richard moved closer, the gun now leveled at her chest. "I saved your son," he hissed, a bitter smile forming. "You call me a monster, but without me he'd be dead." His words carried conviction, twisted by the arrogance of a man who believed his own madness. Evelyn, still on her knees, lifted her tear-streaked face. "Stop, Richard," she whispered, her voice frail. "You lost control a long time ago." The millionaire turned toward her, and for an instant his gaze flickered with something human, something broken. "You don't understand, Evelyn. Everything I did was to survive." The gun wavered between the two women, the weight of his guilt trembling in his hand. Martha took another step forward. Her eyes burned with a strength that silence couldn't contain. "Survive?" she repeated. "You call this survival?" The air grew tighter, heavier. "You built your life on the pain of others and called it salvation." The word salvation struck like a blade. Evelyn froze, realizing that even truth could shatter what little humanity remained in him. The millionaire's gaze shifted to the boy. Eli's breathing was shallow, his eyelids fluttering. For a brief second, Richard's confidence faltered. He knelt, lowering the gun, his voice trembling. "He's the key, Martha. The cure is inside him. If I die, it all dies with me." It wasn't a threat, and it was desperation. His eyes gleamed with feverish faith, a man too far gone to see the horror of his own design. Evelyn rose, her pale face streaked with tears. She stepped between the millionaire and the maid. "You're already dead, Richard," she said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked at her, first with disbelief, then with fear. Evelyn's lips quivered. "I loved you, but the man I loved doesn't exist anymore." From her coat, she pulled a small revolver. Her hands trembled, but her aim was steady. Richard moved instinctively, too fast and too late. The gunshot tore through the air, the sound echoing like judgment. His body fell in slow motion, the metallic clang of the weapon hitting the floor fading beneath the sound of Martha's heartbeat. Evelyn stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes empty. Eli whimpered softly, and the maid, trembling, held him tight. The world around them seemed to collapse into silence. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Red and blue lights flickered across the damp walls of the basement. Evelyn looked down at her trembling hands, smeared with blood as if they belonged to someone else. Martha rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the motionless body of the millionaire. What she felt wasn't victory, and it was weight. The truth had been exposed, but the cost was irreversible. And outside, chaos was already on its way. The gunshot thundered through the mansion, shattering the silence like a storm breaking over glass. The millionaire's body hit the floor with a heavy thud, the metallic clatter of his weapon echoing down the long, cold corridors. For a moment, the maid stood frozen, unable to tell if what she felt was relief or horror. Evelyn, pale and trembling, stared at her blood-stained hands as if they belonged to someone else. The basement, once suffocatingly still, now pulsed with the sound of distant sirens drawing near. Emergency lights began to flash, bathing the room in harsh tones of red and blue. Martha clutched Eli tightly, trying to shield him from the chaos. Each pulse of light revealed a grim tableau, the blood pooling on the floor, the shattered monitors, and the millionaire's motionless body, once the symbol of control, now fragile and human. Evelyn stepped backward in silence, her eyes lost in a void only she could see. The pounding of boots echoed from the floors above. The maid's heart raced as the walls trembled from the force of the police breaking in. In seconds, the once silent mansion turned into a whirlwind of shouting, flashing lights, and confusion. Martha instinctively raised her hands, though her eyes betrayed no fear, only exhaustion. Evelyn didn't move. She remained rooted to the ground as if the gunshot had bound her there forever. Police flooded into the basement, their flashlights slicing through the dimness. Detective Dawson descended first. His gaze swept the scene. Martha holding her son, Evelyn frozen in shock, the millionaire sprawled on the floor. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy, thick with disbelief. Finally, Dawson exhaled and broke the silence. "It's over," he said, but it wasn't over. Outside the mansion, chaos had only begun. Cameras, reporters, and onlookers crowded the iron gates. Drones hovered overhead, capturing every angle, every face. News anchors repeated the breaking headline, "Millionaire involved in illegal experiments found near death." The millionaire's name filled every screen, paired with the image of the maid being led out under a blanket, her son in her arms. As ambulances pulled away, flashes from cameras lit the night like lightning. Martha kept her eyes down, her face carved by fatigue and quiet defiance. Beside her, Eli clung to her hand, his gaze vacant, unable to fully grasp what had happened. Evelyn was escorted away by 2 officers, her expression pale, strangely serene, as if the weight of guilt had finally found its rest. Detective Dawson watched it all unfold in silence, a man who had seen too much and understood even more. Hours later, the news ran footage of the mansion cordoned off with police tape. The headline read, "The Hall Empire Collapses." Experts debated ethics, power, and madness, but none of them knew the truth as Martha did. The maid, sitting quietly in the back of an ambulance, said nothing. Her hands still trembled, not from fear but from the heavy realization of what it meant to survive. Dawn crept over New York, cold and gray. The sun's reflection shimmered faintly against the metallic rooftops, mingling with the fading strobe of emergency lights. Martha watched it through the ambulance window. Each ray of light felt like a quiet promise that perhaps pain could transform into something else. Eli slept beside her, his head resting on her shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt the fragile warmth of belonging. But fate wasn't done yet. That morning, Detective Dawson discovered something inside the millionaire's office. An envelope, hidden beneath a stack of documents. On its front, written in a firm hand, Martha Collins. Inside it lay a truth that would change everything once more. Months had passed since that night that changed everything. The scandal surrounding the millionaire Richard Hall still filled headlines. But for Martha, the noise of the world had faded into the background. The maid now lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of New York, the same one where she and her son had lived before the tragedy. The silence was different now. It was no longer the suffocating stillness of the mansion, but the calm that follows years of fear and uncertainty. Eli was recovering slowly. The scars still marked both his body and his soul, but there was life in his eyes again. Sometimes he would sit by the window, watching the cars go by as if searching for meaning in the rhythm of the city. Martha would watch him quietly, her heart heavy yet grateful. Their life was far from perfect, but for the first time in a long while it was simple, and theirs. One morning, a soft knock at the door broke the fragile routine. When Martha opened it, Detective Dawson stood there, holding a weathered envelope in his hands. His expression was serious but gentle. "I found this in Hall's office," he said, handing it to her carefully. "I think it belongs to you." His words hung in the air like something sacred, carrying the weight of unfinished truths. Martha hesitated. In the upper corner of the envelope, written in a firm, precise hand, were the words, "Martha Collins." It was the millionaire's handwriting. Her heartbeat quickened. For a moment she thought about not opening it, afraid of what might be inside, afraid of reopening wounds she'd fought to close. But the detective's silence said it was time. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was aged, but the ink was still clear. The millionaire's voice seemed to echo through the words. "You were right, Martha. I tried to play God and lost everything. What I did to your son was unforgivable, but if there's any justice left in this world, maybe my ruin can mean something greater." The maid read in silence, her eyes welling up, each sentence sounding like both a confession and a plea for forgiveness. Inside the envelope, alongside the letter, was a legal document, a donation contract. Richard Hall had left part of his fortune to fund a medical research center, a project in the name of Eli Collins. The discovery made Martha step back, as if she needed space to comprehend what she was holding. The same man who had destroyed her life was now somehow trying to repair what was left of it. The contrast was overwhelming, mercy emerging from monstrosity. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. There was no hatred left, only an unfamiliar peace. The past could not be erased, but maybe it could be transformed. The maid who once scrubbed away the traces of other people's lives now held in her hands the chance to rewrite her own. The weight of that letter was immense, not because of its wealth, but because of the redemption it symbolized. The detective watched in silence, respectful and still. "He left it for you," he said quietly. "Said it was the least he could do." Martha nodded, folding the letter carefully as though it were sacred. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady but fragile. Dawson turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Not all monsters die without trying to change," he said, then walked away, his footsteps fading into the hall. Martha stood there motionless, the envelope pressed against her chest. Outside, the wind rustled through the curtains. Eli walked into the room and asked softly, "What is it, Mom?" She looked at him and smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "A beginning, son." But deep down, she knew the real beginning was still ahead, and it would carry the name of the boy who survived everything. Time had passed, and the city moved on, swallowing scandals and tragedies with the haste of everyday life. But for Martha, each new day felt like an unexpected gift. The maid now walked through the streets with her head held high, no longer as the woman who cleaned up what others left behind, but as someone who had finally cleaned up her own destiny. There was serenity in her steps, and the weight of guilt had turned into something light, almost hope. The millionaire, still in a coma, remained a headline. The man who once tried to command life through technology now slept between repentance and oblivion. On the news, some called him a monster, others a visionary. Martha, however, called him nothing at all. To her, he was simply a broken mirror of what power could corrupt. Yet, in a strange way, he was also part of the miracle that had brought her son back. The new hospital, Eli Collins Research Center, began to take shape. Funded by the millionaire's fortune, it seemed to give meaning back to the ruins he had left behind. Doctors, volunteers, and scientists gathered there not for fame but for purpose. Martha watched the construction from afar, like someone watching a seed sprout from dry soil. It was proof that sometimes even the hands that wound can help to heal. On the day of the inauguration, the sky was clear, but the wind was sharp. People gathered in front of the modern glass and concrete building, reflecting the morning light. On stage stood Eli Collins, now stronger, his body healed, his gaze steady. His voice trembled at first, but soon gained strength. Cameras and flashes turned toward him, as if the entire world were holding its breath for his words. "My mother taught me that no one is only what they appear to be," Eli began, looking at Martha in the crowd. "Sometimes even the guilty leave something good behind." The murmurs of emotion rippled through the audience. The maid, holding back tears, smiled discreetly. In that moment, she understood that their story didn't end in suffering. It was only the beginning of a legacy born from pain and grown through compassion. The images shifted. Applause, embraces, glances filled with admiration. Eli's speech spread across the media, becoming a symbol of resilience and humanity. While the world celebrated, Martha stood still among the crowd, watching in silence as always. The sound of applause faded in her ears, replaced by the echo of her son's voice and the gentle resonance of forgiveness that had finally found peace. Detective Dawson was also there, quiet among the guests. He watched Martha with a faint smile, proud of what she had become. To him, this woman represented more than justice. She was living proof that truth, when held with courage, can reshape fate. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. Everything that had to be said was already written in time. When the ceremony ended, Martha wandered the halls of the hospital. White walls, the scent of disinfectant, the soft hum of machines, all of it stirred memories she thought she'd buried. Still, she smiled. There, among the light and calm voices, something within her was healing. The maid who once scrubbed other people's floors now walked through a place that bore her son's name, and in a way her own as well. She stopped before a metal plaque fixed to the wall. Eli Collins Research Center, founded in memory of the truth. She traced the engraved letters with her fingertips, feeling a shiver crawl up her spine. It wasn't pride or vanity. It was gratitude, the purest form of redemption. Outside, the sun began to set, and a cool breeze slipped through the glass doors. Martha closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and kept walking. But something awaited her on the way home. One last sign fate had yet to reveal. The end of that day brought a strange calm, as if time itself were breathing slower. Martha and Eli walked together back to their small apartment in the suburbs, the same place where life had slowly begun to rebuild itself. Outside, the city pulsed with the glow of lights and the distant hum of traffic. The maid, clutching her coat close to her chest, walked slowly, savoring the feeling of normalcy, something she hadn't felt in years. Beside her, Eli smiled, holding his mother's hand as if afraid to let go of what he had just regained. When they reached the door, the scene was simple, yet heavy with meaning. The narrow hallway, the old walls, the faint smell of coffee drifting from a neighbor's apartment. Everything seemed familiar, yet different. Martha pulled the key from her pocket, and before turning it in the lock, she noticed a small piece of paper pinned to the doorframe. The wind made the note sway gently, almost as if it were breathing. She froze for a moment, staring at it with equal parts suspicion and curiosity. The note was short, written in firm handwriting. "You saved him. Now save the others." No signature, no mark, just the words, and a faint trace of perfume on the paper, as if someone had left it only moments before. Martha felt her heartbeat quicken. The world seemed to slow down around her. She looked down the hallway, but it was empty, only the distant echo of footsteps and the hum of the elevator. Eli stepped closer, curious. "Mom, what is it?" he asked, his voice innocent, still trying to make sense of fate. Martha didn't answer right away. The maid held the note delicately, as if afraid the wind might steal it away. The letters seemed alive, pulsing with unspoken meaning. There was something familiar in that phrase, as if it were the continuation of a story she thought had ended. Now, the camera would focus on Martha's face. Her expression was a mix of surprise and serenity. There was no fear, only a quiet acknowledgement. The past never truly disappears. The millionaire, though gone, still left traces in her path. Maybe it was destiny calling for another step. Or maybe it was just the echo of choices that had shaped their lives. Eli took the note from his mother's hands and read it again softly. "Now save the others," he repeated, trying to grasp its hidden meaning. Martha smiled faintly. That nearly invisible smile of someone who understands something they cannot explain. The boy looked up at her, waiting for an answer, but she only brushed his hair gently and said, "Sometimes the answers come when we stop looking for them." They entered the apartment. The lights came on, revealing the modest living room, a worn sofa, old photographs still hanging on the walls. The space radiated peace, but there was a new energy there, something like the merging of an ending and a beginning. Martha placed the note on the table beside the millionaire's letter, looking at the two messages side by side, as if fate had left behind an invisible map. Outside, the night came alive. The camera would slowly pull back, showing the small apartment building surrounded by city lights and distant sounds. Through the window, Martha and Eli could be seen talking quietly, their silhouettes cast gently on the wall. There was a feeling of closure, yet also of rebirth, as if every heartbeat whispered that truth once uncovered never really dies. And then a sound. A single, sharp sound, the echo of a hand slamming on a table reverberating like a soft thunder. The scene freezes. The city lights shimmer across the windows, turning everything into brilliance and mystery. The camera pulls farther back, revealing the skyline of New York glowing in the distance. And in the silence that follows, destiny seems to whisper, there are still doors left to open. Sometimes, life places us before doors that seem ordinary, but with just one gesture, one choice, everything can change. Martha was only a maid, the millionaire seemed untouchable, and yet destiny tied them together in a web of shadows and revelations. This story reminds us that redemption doesn't come from power, but from truth, and that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep walking even when everything falls apart. Maybe your door is right there too, waiting to be opened. The question is, will you have the courage to turn the key? If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on destiny, forgiveness, or the weight of choice, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every new video is a new door, opening to deep reflections, powerful stories, and ideas that awaken something within. Don't let the next chapter of your own journey pass unnoticed. Click now and discover what's waiting on the other side.